Shankill Graveyard. Shankill Graveyard is one of the oldest graveyards in Belfast, where a church was first recorded in this location in 1306.
The name Shankill comes from the Irish Shankill, which translates as Old Church in English.
On entering the graveyard, we immediately notice a Portland stone statue of Queen Victoria, whose reign from 1837 to 1901 was the longest of any monarch in British history. The statue was carved in 1897 for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. Walking round the graveyard, you can't help but notice the high rates of infant mortality, which is indicative of early industrial Belfast and all the troubles that this brings. Tradition states that children were made to cough 3 times through the railing, saying, "My cough, go with you," which probably began when consumption and similar diseases were commonplace. The cholera epidemic of 1832 to 1833 was known locally as the Black Death, and the ground used for victims' burials was closed over and never opened in case the disease was released. A variety of interesting headstones are set into the boundary wall of the graveyard.
The Reverend Isaac Nelson, one of Shankill's most famous sons, was born in 1809. He ministered in the congregation at Donegal Street Presbyterian Church, Belfast, for 38 years. A prominent supporter of land reform and Home Rule for Ireland, he became a nationalist MP for County Mayo at Westminster from 1880 to 1885. He died in 1888. Another commemorates Alexander Craig, a deputy harbour master, and reminds us of the importance of Belfast as a port from the 1850s onwards. His gravestone inscription reads, having weathered the battle and the breeze, now lies here 1 fathom deep. Nearby is the tombstone of William Crawford Williams, a former worshipful master of Schomberg Loyal Orange Lodge 486 in the district. Williams was certainly not the first supporter of William of Orange to be interred here, a point highlighted by the Reverend Dr. Davis, a chaplain in the Williamite army who wrote in his diary on the eve of the Battle of the Boyne,
16th of June 1690. This day the remainder of the Dutch foot and most of the dragoons arrived, insomuch that there were not less than 500 sail of ships together in the loch. In the afternoon I went to the mountain's foot to bury Corporal Smith of Captain Coote's troop, which I did at an old burying place within half a mile of Belfast called Shankill. And as I returned through the town, I saw the King coming home with his guards, having been at the White House, and seen his train of artillery being 40 pieces.
On the left boundary wall, the remains of the former watch house, used during the era of the body snatchers, can be seen.
During the 19th century, the need for surgical training in schools of anatomy in Glasgow and Edinburgh fuelled a market for corpses.
When Ulsterman, Burke and Hare murdered about 15 people in Edinburgh and sold their bodies to the anatomy department of the university, a watch house was built in Shankill Graveyard to guard against these resurrection men.
Such was the public outrage at the terrible events revealed by the Edinburgh trial that, in 1832, Parliament passed a special act legalising human dissection and authorising a sufficiently large supply of dead bodies for the needs of the medical schools of Great Britain and Ireland.
This ended the threat to the dead of the Shankill.
The last burial took place here in 1934 and the graveyard closed in 1958.
Unfortunately, in the clearance of the old cemetery in the 1950s, several hundred gravestones were destroyed, leaving only the more important monuments intact. This really amounted to the wanton destruction of a large part of the social history of the Shankill. After extensive renovation work, it was opened as the Shankill Rest Garden in 1964. Shankill Cemetery was used by all denominations from plantation times onwards. Even today, the town of Belfast remains in the civic parish of Shankill.